I made a balance board. My kids went surfing for the first time this past summer and absolutely loved it. So in order for them to keep practicing while it's freezing cold outside, I decided to make them this balance board as a holiday gift. This is a super simple project: plywood, scraps, and some PVC pipe. I decided to make it just a little bit complicated by doing a walnut inlay, which is a totally not necessary step, but it was really fun to challenge myself and figure it out. Just a quick shout out to this week's sponsor, 3-in-1. You'll hear more about their product later on in the video. Let's get started with the build. I started this project by the computer by drawing up a template that was a similar shape to a surfboard, and it was about 41 inches long because that's how big the piece of plywood I had was. So I just lined up the lines on the template and then cut it out. If you're interested in this project, you could head on over to my website and download this template. After it was cut out, I just had to line it up on the plywood and trace the outside. I wanted to save on paper, so I only did half of the template, and after tracing it, all you have to do is flip it over to the other side and trace the other side, and then you have the full board. I cut off most of the excess of the board at the table saw and then brought it over to my workbench, and now it's ready to be cut to shape. I cut out the shape with the jigsaw, staying really close to the line but not going over it. That way I could bring it over to a sander afterwards and flush it up to the line and make it a smooth cut. I didn't catch that on film though, but yes, I did sand this after I cut it. Now the board would basically be done after cutting it out, but I just wanted to challenge myself a little bit and do some inlay work. I marked off the center of the board and then worked from there. There was some trial and error in trying to figure out what kind of spacing I wanted between the lines, and in the end, a distance of 5.5 inches between the points looked really nice to me. To route all the grooves for the inlay, I'm going to use this jig with my router. I made a video on how I made this jig a few weeks ago, and I'll put a link somewhere around this video. Basically, you just line it up on your cut line and flip up the little flap and route away. This jig references the center of your router, so you just have to line it up onto your cut line and then use any router bit you want and it will cut on the center of that line. I made a very similar pattern on my walnut T-box with brass inlay video, and a few people got a little bit upset that I used a CNC for that project. So here I'm showing you how you don't need a CNC. You could just use a simple jig and a router to create a similar pattern or any pattern you want. Moving on, the router leaves rounded corners, so to prepare it for the inlay, I took a chisel and I just squared up all the corners. I cut those grooves in the board to be about a 1/16 deep, so I needed a safe way to cut that on the table saw. So I came up with this thin ripping jig. And you guys asked me on Instagram to make a whole other video on that jig, so I'll work on that for next week, and if you're watching in the future, there is probably a link somewhere around this video. After cutting the piece to be about a 1/16 thick, I then ripped them into 1/2 inch wide pieces because I was using a 1/2 inch router bit to make the grooves. Now I needed a safe way to cut all those thin little strips. I made this little miter box when I made my 3-string guitar, and all of the angles on the inlay meet at the center at a 45 degree. So I used a square to cut a groove into this miter box, and then all I had to do was place the pieces into the box, cut away, and then put it into the groove on the board, and then cut off the excess. And then repeat all of those steps until I was done filling up the whole board. I was really happy with how these angles were fitting into each other, and now let me take a moment to talk about this week's sponsor. As you can see from the attire that I'm wearing in my workshop, and because I'm completely shivering right now, winter has set in, and the cold weather can really do damage to your outdoor locks. This lock on the back door to my house was actually not functioning for quite a while, and I thought I needed to replace the lock. So 3-in-1 sent over their lock dry lube to see if it was going to fix the problem. You could head on over to my Instagram to see a video where I tested this out, and I really had no idea if it was going to work, and after 2 little sprays, the lock was working like new again. So I'm really happy that I pushed off on actually replacing the lock, because this is definitely a much easier and less expensive fix. You could pick up a can of 3-in-1 lock dry lube at Home Depot. Now let's get back to the build. After cutting all the pieces to size, it was time to glue them in. I just used some regular wood glue on most of them because they fit really snug into the grooves, but some of them for some reason were just a little bit loose. So I used some CA glue along with the regular wood glue to temporarily clamp them into place while the glue set up. If you wanted to be extra careful and make sure that they're clamped really well, you could probably also use some parchment paper and then lay down another piece of plywood on top and then clamp the two boards together. That way you'll make sure that it's clamped down really tight. I just didn't think that was necessary for this project. After the glue set up, I used my handsaw to trim off all the ends, and then I used my hand plane to flush up all the walnut so that it was flush with the top of the plywood. And then I took my router and I used a round over bit and rounded over all of the edges. In order for the balance board to be safe and functional, it needs some stops so that the roller doesn't slip out from under the board. So I made these little stops from some scraps and then worked on spacing them out onto the board. I used the center line from the template as a reference, and then I marked 10 inches from the nose and 10 inches from the tail in. And then I marked 5.5 inches towards the ends of the board from the center line to place the stoppers. This style of balance board is called rail to rail, which means you go from side to side, like to mimic surfing. So you could do like a whole row of a piece of wood, but I think these blocks are just enough. And it also gives you the opportunity to flip the roller around so that you can go from nose to tail. I glued the blocks down and then used a brad nailer to hold them into place while the glue dries, and then used a little block plane to ease all the edges. And after sanding everything to 120, I finished everything with 2 coats of wipe-on poly. In order for the roller to be a little bit grippy, I decided to use this shelf liner on the board. So I cut it to size, and then I tried to figure out a way to attach it to the board. You could use some sort of glue or whatever. I decided to use some double-sided carpet tape. This stuff is super sticky, and I think it worked out really well. It took a little bit of time to make sure that I was lining it up and to make sure that there were no bumps in it. But I think I did a pretty good job, and I don't think that this piece is going anywhere. I think it's going to stay on that board. For the roller, I just used a 3-inch, 2-foot-long piece of PVC pipe and painted it so that it looked nice. And the balance board is complete. I'm really happy with how the inlay turned out. This was really fun to figure out. Again, not a necessary step. If you want, you could just paint it. I think maybe do some sort of design with some grip tape would be really awesome. And speaking of grip, I thought of a lot of ways to make the roller grippy. One would be to wrap the PVC in some duct tape or something like that. I think that this shelf liner on the back is a great idea. I think it's really grippy for the kids and safe for the kids. And I use 3-inch PVC pipe. If you want more of a challenge, you could definitely up it to 4-inch. That would be really challenging. But since it's for my kids, I don't want them breaking any bones, so sticking with the 3-inch. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you again to 3-in-1 for sponsoring this video. Seriously, their lock dry lube, something that I personally used, and it worked for me, so I hope it helps you guys out too. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you on the next build. I made a balance board. Does it feel like surfing?
Yes. Can I try?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that was cool.
Whoa, don't go on it while someone else is on it.
We're so good at it.
Whoa.